Welcome to Mishna study Masechet Terumot Perek Aleph Mishnah Aleph. First Mishnah, we're going to discuss over here 5 people that are not allowed to give Teruma. So they're not allowed to separate Teruma, right? Interestingly enough, of course, as Rabbi Yehuda Nasi generally does, we just jump right into the topic, no introductions. So Hamisha lo yitrumu. There are 5 people that cannot separate Teruma. V'im tarimu, if they did separate Teruma, and Teruma, what they gave doesn't count. And what do you mean it doesn't count? So imagine if you separated Teruma and you gave it. So if it doesn't count at all, then what you separated from is still considered tevel, right? No one's allowed to eat that, right? It's asur to eat altogether. Also, what you separated is not kadosh, right? So what are these 5 people? Before I get into it, Rambam, I'll just point out over here, has a great rant that he opens up on the Masechet with, and he basically has a rant on diktuk. But it's really the opposite, meaning he says over here, interestingly enough, he speaks about, why does it say taram? What's the language of taram? Because a lot of people actually say, hachmei alashon, they say it should be hirim, mirim, yarim, right? More in that kif'il sense. And they were criticizing the language of the Mishnah over here. And Rambam says that, he says, truthfully, there's nothing to discuss. Hachamei Mishnah, right? When they spoke, they obviously knew the language that they were speaking in, and they spoke in a precise language. They lived in Eretz Yisrael, and if they said taram, right, that's how it was spoken, and that was the lashon. And it was right? This is how you should respond to them, meaning language is something that is developed, and as they spoke, this is how they spoke, and this is obviously the language, and this is Lashon HaKodesh. So that's how he really speaks, and then he even goes on to say, and if you even ask the Hachamim HaShelemim, and if you really ask the real Hachamim, they would respond as I'm telling you as well, right? So it's interesting, he just opens up with that the language in the Mishnah is correct, right? As they spoke, of course it's correct. Now, who are these 5 people? So first of all, what's the Teruma? The Teruma, as we mentioned, is Reshit Ganecha, Tiroshecha V'Yitzarecha, right? Reshit Gezerecha Titen Lo. You have to give to the Kohen, right? So those 3 Midoraita. By the way, specifically, it's grain, wine, and olive oil, right? Grain, grapes, and olives. And the Torah doesn't give any mention to the appropriate shiur. It calls it a Reshit, right? And right, as the pasuk says, "Vani atati lechad mishmeret terumotai," right? It calls it, and it calls it Torah. So it's Reshit, and it's called a teruma. So anything we know earlier, right? When Bnei Yisrael actually, when they were collecting for the Mishkan, right? Anything that Israel gave to the Mishkan was also called a teruma, right? Ve'ikoli teruma, the pasuk says over there. And so too over there, when we collected for the Mishkan, there were certain people that were not allowed to give to the Mishkan. So too, there are these 5 people that are not allowed to separate Teruma. And who are these 5 people? The 5 people are a Heresh, someone who's deaf mute, a Shoteh, right? Someone who's really is an imbecile, right? Is totally clueless, right? Really mentally, mentally not there. Katan, someone who's a child, a minor. Someone who separates something that's not his, right? Imagine if I go to my neighbor's, yard and I start to separate his grain, that's not considered anything. Right? And if a goy comes and he separates the Israels, even if it's within his Israel's, not necessarily possession. Rambam actually says Birshuto over here, Kilomar, that is talking about even with his permission, even with his has permission, it's still not considered Teruma at all, and it doesn't even count. Right? Other Mishnah will see other things that potentially he's not supposed to, but if he does it, it counts. So here, these 5 people, even if they do it doesn't even count. Now, how do we know by the Mishkan, right? How do we know that these people were not supposed to give by the Mishkan? So the pasuk says, "Daber el bnei Yisrael likholi teruma me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo tikhol terumati." And Hachamim learn from that pasuk, where it says, "Daber el bnei Yisrael." Right, this comes to exclude a goy. Right, that's the last one. The nochri is not allowed. Then the pasuk continues, "Me'et kol ish." Ish, he has to be a man. This comes to exclude a katan. Asheri devenu libo, right? Someone who gives from his own heart, right? This comes to exclude a haresh and a shoteh, right? Someone who's deaf mute and someone who's a shoteh, someone who's not mentally there because they can't give on their own, right? They can't give on their own will. Asher tikhol me'itam, right? You have to take from them. This comes to exclude someone that's giving for that's not his, right? So all these, and we learn it for the for over here for Teruma as well, right? As we mentioned, they're both considered Teruma. Now, we additionally know the pasuk says, "Ken tarimu gam atem," right? So what's gam atem? So generally, gam atem, you also are allowed to separate teruma. So who's that coming to include? If you are also allowed to separate, who's the original? And so we're saying, oh, you're allowed to have a shaliach. Yeah, shaliach's allowed to, right? And gam atem, you also are allowed to separate. So your shaliach and yourself, right? So you're attached to someone else, and therefore we see everyone's allowed to. But ma'atem b'nei berit, af shluchachem b'nei berit, they both have to be Jewish, and therefore the last case for the goy wouldn't count. Now, why does it have to say hamisha lo yituramu, 5 specifically that are not separating? This comes to exclude, right? It comes to be ma'at, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And we know Rabbi Yehuda says a katan shelo yavish tesaro terumato teruma. It does count if a katan brings teruma, right? So that could have been less, it could have been even 4. Over here, it's 5 people that doesn't work for, and that's how we end the Mishnah. Halacha, of course, is not like Rabbi Yehuda, it's like our Mishnah, as we mentioned.